said that after you hit that deer with your car, didn't you?
All right, employer certification. What do you need to have for your employer to certify you? Come on, you should know this already. Receive what?
Certification.
Well, first you got to go get classroom training. How much?
16 hours.
16 hours NAS or 8 hours SNTTC 1A, right? Hey, look at that. That was quick. All right. Written tests. Administered. By who's going to give the written test?
Employer.
The employer. So we may have a general and specific. So general will be general non-destructive testing procedures. Specific would be specific to that method. Often the general procedures have a lot to do with how things are made. And the specific would be how to test it using the appropriate medium. A practical exam. What's the practical exam?
Demonstrating your knowledge.
Running the machinery. Can you do it? And you have to have an eye exam. Who's going to administer that? The employer.
What does an eye exam?
You check your eyes.
2020, baby.
So you're going to check near vision, and you're going to use a Jaeger chart. J-E-A-G, Jaeger
Jagger
chart.
Mick Jagger?
Yep. A Mick Jagger chart
Bless you.
and color with the Ishihara. Ishihara test.
But what if you wear glasses? Like, does that matter?
Yeah, wear glasses. Doesn't matter.
Oh, okay.
You just have to, whatever it is you have when you take the test. So I would just probably get stronger glasses. Because I took this picture and I want you to notice this is probably 12 font right here. And so that is very, very tiny. And so I think you have to read J1. Yeah, I saw the people waiting in the mud while purchasing their provisions. And so, yeah, it's this kind of weird thing they have you read. The above letters, sub 10, the visual angle 5 inches. I don't remember. It says in the card. It's like close. It's like 12 inches or something. So, all right, so there's your Mick Jagger test. There's your Ishihara.
Dude, I don't know anything. What does this look like to you?
There's Mickey Mouse and Donald Duck. This one? You should see an 8. Everybody sees an 8? You guys can't play along very well, can you? We would have had him going for a while, but no, you had to. It's a 5 and a 3. Yeah, but that's not because you can't see. This you don't know your numbers well. Yes.
HBR test is the gold one. I noticed, but you're not funny. Oh my. I laughed.
Okay, what else do I have? No, that's for later. So, yeah, that's normal writing. You can see normal writing over here is going to be about this, about here maybe. And that gets very, very tiny. I can't even see that. And you got it blown up on the board. You should really be able to see it.
Sorry, I don't see the colors.
You didn't?
You serious?
No, it's yours.
Well, that's why you have that test. All right. I'm going to throw this in here just for a great example of what you can expect to see. So Who's Lycoming?
Manufacturer.
And they don't pronounce it that way, do they? Lycoming. Lycoming. All right. So if you are going to, you're going to overhaul engines, you're going to be the engine business, and you want to do non-destructive testing on engines, and I'm looking at Lycoming SI 1285 Foxtrot. What is SI? Service instruction 1285 Foxtrot. Foxtrot's the latest version of it. I don't know what the latest, but this is what I looked up. It says this: you must be, this is in quote, qualified and certified. Qualified and certified.
Well, don't you have to be qualified to be certified?
Nope, we talked about that. I'm qualified. I have in the past recent within the last, what is it, 3-4 years, I have over 32 hours of classroom training, and I have way over 270 hours of experience in PT. So am I qualified? Has my employer certified me?
No.
They have not. So I am highly qualified in these two right here and current with my classroom training, but I don't have a certifying employer.
Oh. In that
Okay, so could the school qualify me? They absolutely could. So what would they have to do?
Go through the steps. They would have to read your notes to you.
They would have to go through the steps to qualify through NTT 1A and NAS 410, set up a non-destructive program, get a level 3 involved, and set it all up, and then they could certify me as a level 2.
Yeah, they're not going to.
Sounds expensive.
And time consuming, and what would be the benefit to the school? There's no money involved.
You could do classes where you could. They could start a side hustle.
You can't, no. I could do classes. I'm looking into, I think I can still do it. So, but it's just easier to hire somebody. So you teach. So anyway, yeah.
When they define classroom as 16 hours,
Yeah?
so like when you go to A&E or AS and T, when you go to do like there, do they have a level 3 that instructs you to get those classes?
I don't think they have classes. You have to go to a different school.
Okay.
Like when I went to Hillier School in LA. Yeah, at level 3's teaching.
So does our classroom time not count because it's not a level 3 teaching? Or-
I'm going to get back to you on that one.
Just go with the flow, Steve.
Just go with the flow, Stephen. All right, so there we go. Ishihara test. Now what? This one. Okay. So light combing. So I want you to get a feel for what the industry is expecting from you. You can't just go out there and start doing these tests. I know I'm going to say it. I know people are going to go out there and do them anyway. Like, well, I remember I had some red stuff. And so, okay. You must be qualified and certified. Actually, that's not the end of the quote here. Qualified and certified to a written procedure, IAW. What does that stand for? In accordance with NAS 410. So if you're not qualified and certified to NAS 410, you can't do this. Doesn't matter what kind of equipment you have. Doesn't matter how great you are. So could a shop call me up today and say, hey, we've got an engine we need NDT'd. I know you got brand new equipment. It's absolutely qualified, certified. By the way, all of our new equipment came with certification, so that equipment is solid. Every light, every piece of test equipment, it's got a certification card with it that's good for at least a year. So can I do it for them?
Yes.
Why can't I?
You are certified.
I am not certified. Am I qualified?
Yes.
Yes. Did I used to be certified?
Yes.
Yes. But am I now? No, I'm just qualified because I don't work for the employer anymore. Okay. All right, qualified, certified, written procedure. Can you be a level 1, 2, 3? Does it matter? It just says qualified, certified. Could be anybody so far. Persons who make, accept, or reject decisions must be a level 2.
Well,
Now it does. So can I assign my level 1 to do a crankshaft? Go have my cup of coffee, tea, and come back in a little bit and ask them how it went?
you look over 'em.
Yeah, well, it's got to be my name on it. I'm the one that has to make the accept or reject, and I'm not going to accept or reject something I didn't visually inspect 100% of. Procedures, I think I can fit this in here. Procedures must be approved by a level what? 3. In accordance with, what do you think? NAS 410. So can my level 3 just make up some stuff?
Yep.
Good. Sure, pretty much.
Like, well,
Seems like a nice cat.
let's make it work with what you got.
Kevin,
Yeah.
No.
you've talked a lot about like the qualification stuff, but how does it actually fall into like a regular day?
How's it what?
Fall into like a regular day of work? Like, is it just something that you do? Are you stationed there? Like, is that what you do all the time?
Oh, it depends on. I got to go back because Janet's having a meltdown over here.
Oh, it's flipping.
There.
Thanks.
Okay, so there are some places where that's just your job. You do magnetic particle, and maybe you're cross-trained to do liquid penetrant, or maybe you want to do another. There are some companies, like one of the ones that we work with, QCNDT. He is like a level 3 in almost everything. You know, and so you can call, his name's Dave Arms, he's a great guy. Call him up. Dave, I got an airplane that needs this part ultrasound inspector, this part eddy current, and he's a mobile guy, and he'll show up and he'll do the test, and bill you, and then off on his merry way. For me, it was just part of the job that I did is building engines. So I managed my own days, so I would set things up, and so I would have a series of engines in various stages, and then one day I would say, okay, today I'm going to do NDT on engines. So that'd be my NDT day. And so I would do maybe 2, 3, 4, 5 engines that day. Yeah.
So him being like a mobile guy working for himself,
Yeah.
how is he certified?
Central cert.
Okay.
Or he can self-cert through his business if he follows NAS 410 and sets up a company.
Okay.
I could do that. I could set up my company, as far as I know, and then apply through and follow the procedures and set up my company and then self-certify. But I don't think there's a way where you can just do it without an outside. You got to have a level 3 somewhere that was central certified. Can I move this now, Janet?
Yeah.
You sure?
Yeah. Good.
Okay, so where we last left off, the last thing I said there was the, what did I say? Janet, tell me, what did I say? Procedures must be approved by level 3 in accordance with NAS 410. Okay, so 410, and as if that wasn't enough, procedures and steps must comply with ASTM E1444 for MT. What's MT? Means there's nothing in it. Magnetic particle, and ASTM E1417 for PT. So that's what Lycoming says. So not only do you have to follow the NAS 410 certifying procedures, but then you have to follow ASTM 1444 and 1417 for the actual procedure of what you're doing. So it gets very detailed. And by the way, some of these ASTMs, they can cost you up to $150 just to get a copy of this. They are not cheap at all. So some of this stuff gets very expensive. That was Lycoming. TCM, what is TCM? It is not really called TCM anymore, but that's just what I'm going to keep calling it. So, what do I have here? So this would be for PT. They want, in accordance with ASTM E1417, E1208. This is just what's in the service bulletin. E1209, E1219, and type 1. Type 1. What is type 1? Penetrant. That's fluorescent, not the visible.
Yeah.
Method A, B, C, or D, which will mean something to you later. Personnel, certified to level 2 and 3. It says personnel certified level 2 using procedures approved by level 3, I should say. So level 2 approved by level 3. There we go. And when I was doing engines, I haven't read the service bulletins in a little while. Continental had a wonderful service bulletin that said all 6-cylinder engines, and define all.
All.
Right.
You want it.
That means if it has 6 cylinders, it is one of them. All 6-cylinder engine, all 6-cylinder crankcases when removed from the crank, all 6-cylinder crankshafts when removed from the crankcase must be ultrasound inspected, and the ultrasound inspection had to be complied with by somebody who was specifically trained at the Continental factory or one of their authorized schools to ultrasound their crankshafts. And this was a very expensive school that you had to go to.
That's an inside job.
Yeah. All right, let's talk about definitions now. All right. When you get into the world of NDT, there are definite meanings to certain things. And you got to know what these are, especially if you start taking some of the tests. So an indication. What is an indication?
The finding from the test.
Okay, that's the best response from an NDT method. So what's a response then? Or what's an indication? What could that be?
Fluorescent dye.
And anything, okay? Could be a crack. That's an indication. What else could it be? Forged marking, okay? A lap where 2 parts came together. Maybe it's where something's pressed into something else. And some of the, if we're talking about penetrant, the dye leak between those 2 things are pressed together. What else?
A hard turn on like a crankshaft.
Okay, a sharp corner, especially the inside, where you get a flux leakage.
An internal cavity.
Welds.
An internal cavity, welds. How about a fingerprint?
Oh yeah. Tim knows what
Okay, fingerprint. How about poor washing? That's an indication.
Steven.
All right, so any of this can be an indication. Indication means you're getting a response from the method. So we're looking at, say, Magnaflux, magnetic particle inspection, and you've got, if you washed a part with and used soap, maybe the soap dried and left a soap scum that kind of leaves a rough circle. How about that? So the fluorescent particles tend to pull up around it just because they're trying to drain off, and they pull up around it. There's an indication. Fuzz off your shirt sometimes. Hair, something like a string lays on there. Indication. So any of these are indications, but what does that mean? A false indication. So first we get an indication. So that's an N. Indication. Indications are reasonably easy to get. And honestly, it's not hard, it kind of is, to train somebody to do non-destructive testing, especially the 2 that we're going to talk about. So when I talk about most non-destructive testing, we're strictly talking about PT and MT. So it's not necessarily difficult to train somebody to do the procedures, or at least to get them to tell you, okay, what are the procedures? And they'll tell you, and you can watch them do a crankshaft. But I tell you, the minute I step out of the booth and walk away to answer the phone or something, they're going to be coming around the booth following me and go, okay, I got an indication. It's like, okay. And so, even somebody who's on their, I don't know, 10th engine or more, they're still constantly, can you interpret this? Can you interpret this? So that leads us to this one, interpretation. Determining whether or not an indication is relevant or not. And I'll talk a little more about relevant versus non-relevant in a second. So we have false indication. What would give me a false indication? Okay, not washing it properly, failure to wash it, your dirty fingerprints all over it, some sort of fuzz or something on the part. False indication. An indication. An indication that is interpreted to be caused by a condition other than a discontinuity. An indication that is interpreted oops, started right the wrong road. Interpreted to be caused by a condition other than a discontinuity. What is a discontinuity? That's crack. That's a flaw. That's it's non-continuous. So it could be a crack. It could be like when they made it a hollow spot in a part, something like that. But that's subsurface. So false indication. What are my false indications? Could be fingerprint, flint, flux concentrations in corners because you use too much amperage. It could be dye leaking out of a bolt hole or a part that was pressed together. What's that? Yep, something like that. So, okay, false interpretation. So that was discontinuities. What I said, what is a discontinuity? Lack of continuity, interruption in the physical properties, or basically a crack. D-S-C-O-N-T-I-N. Discontinuity, lack of continuity. An interruption. An interruption in the physical property properties of the part. Okay, so if I get a discontinuity, I can put this crack. You're going to put that. It doesn't have to be a crack, but that's basically what that's saying. It's got some sort of crack. It's got a problem. It's not whole. All right, so if I get a discontinuity, does that mean it's bad? Nah, not necessarily. So that brings us to this, non-relevant. Non-relevant. Like the nuts thing?
On the crankshaft where you pressed in the nut for the propeller, I guess?
Flange bolts, flange bushings.
Get that. I don't know what it's called.
I figured it out. Okay, non-relevant indication. Could a crack be a non-relevant indication?
No.
It depends. Well, yes, it very much could be. There are some items that have allowable cracks. There's not a lot in general in aviation. The engines I worked on, there were a few crank cases that had allowable cracks in the crankcase. There was none in the crankshafts and the steel part, that's for sure. But a non-relevant indication, an indication is caused by a condition or type of discontinuity that is non-rejectable. So, an indication. I gotta scroll up just a little bit so I have more paper. Indication that is caused by a condition or type of discontinuity that is non-rejectable. A lap seam or something like that. When you're making metal, and think of it when it's still hot and it's folded back upon itself, but it molds together, so you get a lap seam in there. So it may give you an indication. So then there's non-relevant and relevant. So what is a relevant indication?
Cause for rejection.
There we go. That's the best way to sum it up. An indication is caused by a condition or type of discontinuity that requires evaluation, which usually leads to rejection. So an indication that is caused by a condition that is caused by a condition is caused by a condition or type of discontinuity that that requires evaluation. All right, so sometimes, or often, so I'm working in the dark there and I'm working like on a crankshaft or something and I get an indication. So I get an indication, my first thought is, all right, is it relevant or non-relevant? Is it just something that's on the crankshaft, a soap line or something like that, fuzz, a little scratch in the part that's collecting some of the medium. And so the very next thing I do is I'm going to wipe it clean. So I'd have rags, some little Scotch-Brite, something just to wipe and make sure that there's no marks on it. So I would do that, re-energize the part, check it again, and if it comes back, the indication comes back, then I'm going to turn on the white lights and I'm going to get a magnifying glass. I'm going to look and see what I can see. Do I see anything that could be causing this to be happening? If I don't, back in the dark, and then start evaluating it further. So maybe I would, you have to be careful because some parts, you're not allowed to grind on parts. So if you don't have data that says you can polish any more than what you've done, then you can't do anything. But be honest, if I get a part where I've come to the point where it's like, okay, I've got an indication, it's not a non-relevant, and now I have to call it a relevant indication and I have to evaluate it, and then I evaluate it and I say, okay, this is a part that can't have any discontinuities. This is some sort of discontinuity as I see it. At that point, I'm red tagging it. So if I'm going to red tag it, I might as well evaluate a little bit more. And so I would polish on it a little more or sand it a little more or do something, as I've already red tagged it theoretically. And if I can get the discontinuity to come out even brighter, so be it, which often happens. Or if the discontinuity started to disappear, then okay, now I've got a crankshaft that I can, or a part that I have to send out to somebody who has the technical expertise that they do have approval to grind or do whatever it is to remove that problem. Yeah.
So in general, you're looking for any field discontinuity in the part and then reject them, or when you find that you continue to perform all tests.
Okay, so if I'm doing like crankshafts, I always say, you guys, you'll say, so we'll put the flange to the left. It's just because the way I do things, I go from left to right. So it's just natural, so I always put the flange on the left. Where's the crankshaft most likely to crack? On the flange where the propeller is spinning. So if I find a crack in the flange, I'm done. I don't care what the rest of it looks like. It doesn't matter. It's bad. So I may just look over it real quick to see, for my own benefit, to see, hey, if it cracks here, is it likely to propagate out? Is this likely to crack? Remember, I did a lot of prop strikes. So I saw a lot of crankshafts that have hit the ground. And so it's always interesting to me to see how far back the cracks go. They don't go back very far. It's rare to see one on the rear end of it.
Have you ever ground them out to see how deep they went?
I have.
Or are they pretty deep?
I've had some weird crankshafts that'll show like a fuzz, and you can tell that it's a subsurface, or you may even get a small indication showing its surface, but you can see that there's something else there. And so I had some rubber abrasive things that I would have on a high-speed air tool, and so I would, once I've decided, well, it's going to be crap, or there's room to grind it. So if I have a crankshaft that's standard and I know I can go 10 under, well, I can grind on a little bit and send it to somebody else who can grind it 10 under. So I'll just want to see if it's worth sending out. So I'll grind on it a little bit, and every time I've done that, it's opened up a crack. It just comes out. I'm like, whoa, there we are. So it's never have I started that and watched them go away. They always get worse.
So like on a prop strike, does it usually, the cracks usually go back to like the slinger ring or back further?
Usually just past the slinger ring at the worst. Remember, Continentals are nitrided, Lycomings aren't. So Lycomings are going to bend first. So I usually see them more around the slinger ring because the flange will bend, but Continentals are nitrided, so they'll crack right up front. All right, so flaw. Flaw is bad. An imperfection. Or discontinuity that may be detectable by NDT but is not necessarily rejectable. So it's not perfect, it's got a flaw, just like us. Are we rejectable?
Yeah.
I knew I was going to dunk on Christian, so. So fine, we'll use Christian. Does he have imperfections?
Yes.
But are we going to reject him?
Yes.
No. All right. He just needs further evaluation, right?
Before we reject it.
Yeah. Flaw, an imperfection or discontinuity. Can I spell discontinuity? I abbreviate that in some ways. That may be detectable by NDT, but is not necessarily rejectable. Okay, so that's a flaw. Then there's a defect. An imperfection or discontinuity that may be detectable by NDT, but is not necessarily rejectable. Then there's a defect.
That's Christian. Defect. There we go.
A flaw whose
You're welcome.
Size, shape, or other properties do not meet acceptance criteria. And these are applicable to any NDT, all of these definitions. So everything we've talked about so far is more or less applicable to all of the methods. How we doing, Janet? Hands getting sore?
Just a little bit.
I have like a page and a half and then another one.
Just a page and a half?
Well, how many do I have?
Like half of
Why does that
mine.
have anything to do with anything? You just want to know? You got a page and a half?
All right, so let's talk about liquid penetrant. All right, so we're going to talk level 1-ish stuff here, all right? So keep in mind that we're not going all the way into level 3 schooling here. It's don't have time. Wish I did. All right, liquid penetrant inspection basics. How far can I go up here?
Oh, I'm on number 5.
Yeah, on number 5?
Yeah.
That, look at you go. All right. Liquid penetrant. What is the abbreviation? PT. All right. Liquid penetrant inspection is a non-destructive testing method for locating what kind of discontinuity? Surface or subsurface? Surface only. Must be open to the surface, this crack. If this crack is not open to the surface, this doesn't work. NDT method for locating surface only discontinuities. In other words, the crack must be open to the surface. So how's this all going to work? Well, let's see here. Let's create some sort of part that has a discontinuity. And this is magnified 10,000 times. So I have a part with an open discontinuity. My steps involved is number 1, and I'll write this down later. First, we got to clean. Okay, we have to clean the part. Cleaning is often overlooked and underestimated. If I clean it wrong, this isn't going to work. So what are my cleaning methods can I use? Well, in the NDT books, they love to say vapor degreaser, but we live in California. That's not going to happen. So in a perfect world, we'd use some sort of volatile degreaser, vapor degreaser, and we would degrease it with that, but it's not good for the environment, so we can't do that. So now we have stuff like hot sea washers with soap, steam cleaning, pressure washing, citrus-based cleaners, alcohol wipes at best, things like that. So we want to get all the grease and stuff off of it. Well, what if it's got paint on it?
Take it off.
Why do I have to take paint off?
Approved media blast.
Because if there's a crack in the paint, then it's gonna go.
Well, if there's a crack under the paint, then we could have a problem. So we don't want that. So we got to expose the part. So paint can cover up. Paint can bridge a gap. So it could crack under the paint. So it's got to be stripped of paint. What can we use to strip paint? So you're saying media blast. So what kind of media? Walnut? Plastic? No. No. I'll throw a cookie at you. Or baking soda, something very soft. All right, and the reason why is, okay, so if we use glass, sand, garnet, something like that, this crack is actually it's gonna peen itself over. It'll bring the metal and stretch the metal over. This is kind of why you're having problems with the cylinder today, because that had been done. So it can bridge that little gap. Then we've sealed that up. Now we're not going to get anywhere with that. So we can't do that.
That'd actually be a cool project.
Just seal up a crack.
Do it once with it open and then go media blast it or sandblast it and then see what it looks like after.
Okay.
Because it's frustrating when you can see the crack, but
Yeah.
expose it.
Yeah, because what you're looking at is a crack that more or less kind of, it looks like this, and that doesn't hold penetrant.
No.
Not, well, it does, but not the method we're using. Just washes right out. So you'd need a different type of penetrant for that one. So, all right, so we clean it. So we, how about wire wheel? Grinder, belt sander,
No.
sandpaper. Okay, all of these are a no, because again, they're going to seal up that crack. Paint thinner's fine. Okay, you do want to think about not filling this up though with chemicals. You have to be careful with that because even if you fill it up with something and penetrant can't get in, it's not going to work. So all right, so we got our do's and don't do's. We clean it. What's the very next step?
Right?
Dry it. Well, okay. Well, assuming it's wet, yes, I'd want it dried. So I'm going to use red here. So the very next step is we clean it. It's all clean and it's prepared and it's ready. Then we're going to apply penetrant. So penetrant is applied to the surface that we want to inspect. We can spray it, brush it, dip it, pour it, dip it, however you want to, but we apply the penetrant on top, and through capillary action, it seeps down into this crack. And we have to wait a while for this to happen. We can't just put it on and just rush off, right? So what is that called? Dwell time. Okay, so we wait the appropriate dwell time, 10 minutes to 120 minutes. If the crack is very small, I'd want a longer dwell time. If it's wide open, a shorter dwell time. If it's cold, I'd want a longer dwell time. If it's hot, a shorter dwell time. So I take these things into consideration. So we've let it dwell. Now what do we do? Okay, we got to remove the excess. It is dry, wet, dry. So if we're using this process here, so we use a dry towel and we wipe off as much as we can. You can wait a minute. Now, if I only do that much, I'm going to get red everywhere. So it's not really easy to do this. So let's just see here. Oops, I want mine. There we go. All right, so
Okay, I get it. Dry, wet, dry.
wipe out, dry, wet, dry. Use a dry cloth, dry cloth, dry cloth, using a new piece of the cloth every time. Then we'll do a wet, the solvent on the rag, and then one more dry. What happens if I spray solvent on here, Stephen?
It takes away all the red dye. And
Washes it all out, and you get nothing. All right? Now what happens?
you have to restart.
No indication.
Okay, as you do this, your inspection starts now, and you watch. And if you have a crack or discontinuity, dye will start seeping out. It is not your job to keep wiping it until it stops coming out of a crack. You watch it, and if you can see that it's coming out of a crack, call it. Hey, I have an indication it's coming out. I keep wiping it, it keeps coming back. Don't keep wiping, all right? Because eventually you wipe all the stuff out. Then we'll put a developer on, which you don't necessarily, I'm going to say you don't have to, because sometimes you can, it's just so obvious. It's like, why waste the time? Developer, and then inspect. And then we'll pick up from this tomorrow.